Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Jason Fidorra. I am the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist based in the Tri-Cities. Um, I know a few familiar faces in this group through work or through birding up that way. But tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about a project we've had in the Columbia Basin for quite a while. And share a little ecology and background of burrowing owls in Washington State and a little range-wide information as well. So I don't think I'll be able to see hands. So if there's a major issue, go ahead and unmute and stop me and interrupt me. But otherwise, I'll just kind of save questions for the end and try to get to anything then. So I do want to recognize also Global Owl Project. You all have some pictures in here and some of their work that they've been part of. David Johnson and his nonprofit group kind of have really brought the burrowing owl work in the Pacific Northwest and artificial burrow work kind of forward over the past little more than a decade. So I'll have a lot of information in here that I'm presenting that's shared from partners. So just first of all, burrowing owls, they're really unique, pretty easy to identify, but as you can kind of see, this is an adult in the picture, perched on the ground, probably right out front of a burrow. They have no ear tufts, bright yellow eyes. Usually can see a white eyebrow. And then they have notably long legs and a short tail, and just kind of overall brown coloration. But, you know, whenever someone contacts me about an owl that they think, we may have a burrowing owl in our backyard and it's up in the tree, it's really habitat is one of the main easy identifiers for this species, because these birds are rarely going to be perched in any sort of tree. They're open country species. You know, they might be perched up on a fence post or something like that, or on top of a sagebrush. But, you know, they're really that open country, sagebrush, grassland, steppe species. So not in the forest, not in the trees in your backyard. Those are probably screech owls or something more fun. You guys have a lot more diversity up your way. But for a part of the year, you can easily identify adults versus juveniles. Juveniles, you know, once they start emerging from the nest burrows up until the fall molt, they have some pretty distinctive features that separate them from the adults. They don't really have the speckled appearance as the adult does. They're more of a solid brown with then a buffy cream chest. That's plain, so you don't see the spots or barring that you see on the adult on the back or on the chest or the head. They do have a buffy wing patch. That's kind of evident when you see one flying away from you or perched on the ground. As you can kind of see in this image, you can see the big carpal bar there on the one in flight, and still see that patch on the one going into the burrow. But they'll lose that by winter. So now if you saw an owl, it'd be difficult to identify it by age or sex. But during the summer, again, during the breeding season, it's actually fairly easy to actually separate males from females if they're a breeding adult. So this primarily has to do with some of their ecology and habits more than anything with genetics. Male pair of burrowing owls, the female's the only one that does the egg incubation. She's the one that kind of broods the chicks. The males don't develop a brood patch. They're more guarding the nest burrow and delivering food. And so what happens in the Columbia Basin in the summer when days are long and sun is hot is that animals and birds that are outside in the sun all day and people tend to, you know, their hair and fur and feathers get a little bleached. Those who stay in the shade, maybe in a burrow underground for the majority of a month on eggs and a month afterwards, stay a little more fresh plumage. So in this image, there's an adult male and female, and it's pretty obvious the difference. And that's the male on my left, on your left, there that's been sun bleached, and the female probably has spent the last 2 months underground primarily or out foraging at night. So kind of a fun fact. It's pretty easy to identify them during the breeding season. Globally, burrowing owls aren't really that unique to Washington. They're fairly wide ranging. We have two subspecies in the United States. The western subspecies, which is pretty much dominates most of the western US, includes our subspecies here in Washington. And the only other subspecies in the US is the Florida subspecies, which is fairly resident and also fairly of conservation concern. But the species itself ranges all the way down to through grasslands throughout Central and South America, high Andes, Paramo, and down to the southern tips of Chile and Patagonia. So fairly wide ranging. There is a lot of genetic work that I know folks are starting to look into a little more closely. There may be some future species splits from what I've heard from David Johnson and a team that's been doing the genetics. Some of the islands like Aruba and some isolated populations seem to have pretty unique genetics. So there could be some additional hidden species in this complex, but for now they're all identified as burrowing owl. And within the genus, actually this has recently changed and I've updated this. There are 9 species currently in the genus Athena with burrowing owls. But burrowing owl is the only one that's typically fossorial. The rest of the species are more commonly cavity nesters, forest birds, and you have the little owl, which inhabits Europe and most of Eurasia. Spotted owlet, I think that one's in India, forest owlet. And then recently they've added the Solomon's owl complex that includes a few island species in the Solomon Islands. So there's several species that were just added to the genus. And this is an image of a white-browed owl, which is endemic to Madagascar. And this is a photograph I got to take a couple years ago on a trip there. And that was a species I was really excited to see due to its affinity or relation to the burrowing owls here in the US. So, but roosting in a tree cavity, totally nocturnal, but still kind of resembles that same burrowing owl kind of stature, white eyebrow. So pretty cool to see. The genus gets its name from the Greek goddess of war and wisdom, Athena. She's often depicted with owl. That would be the little owl, typically of, as I mentioned, Europe. And it just so happens that Athens, where the city gets its name from the Greek god, as well, is also an area with an abundance of little owls in that habitat type. So kind of a no-brainer how this kind of affinity started. And the association of owls with wisdom and war I find pretty interesting, and it goes beyond just the ancient Greeks who have made that association. It's pretty easy in popular culture to find similar associations with owls, either being depicted as school teachers or intelligent, or as mascots for rivalry sports teams or gladiator type Disney movies, or Pixar, probably not Disney, I don't know. But any case, I find that where did we come up with this? The owls have talons and beaks and they're birds of prey and the whole warrior thing. I mean, that kind of makes sense. But wisdom, where does that come from? And the best example of or explanation for this that I found was that kind of what is the definition of wisdom? And that's, loosely could be defined as being able to see the unknown or being able to see what other people can't see, and having two large front facing eyes and being able to see in the dark through the darkness can easily, in my mind, be associated and extrapolated to represent wisdom. And I think that's sort of where that comes from. And I kind of like that, being able to see what others can't. And certainly a lot of owls, being nocturnal, have that capability. The species name, Canicularis, is Latin for a miner or one who owns a mine. And there's no, it's pretty obvious how that connection's made. And as I'll kind of explain, for the most part, these birds are more likely a mine owner than the miner themselves. And we'll get to that. Habitat, we kind of covered this, are open habitats, short grass, sparse shrub cover. They don't necessarily require that real dense shrub cover and sagebrush like you might with obligate species like sagebrush sparrow or sage thrasher. They can do well in sort of degraded shrub steppe or just grassland. Typically, native brunch grasses, but they'll tolerate some cheatgrass. One of the key needs the species has, and where cheatgrass and introduced species of grass, annual grass, cause some problems, is in foraging. If we have really dense, tall cheatgrass in a wet year, really limits foraging availability. Even though prey may be there in high abundance, availability, because of the thick cover, is diminished for owls as well as other species. Burrow obviously plays a big part in this species throughout their life cycle. The burrow is more than just a nest site. They provide year-round protection from both predators and weather. And during the breeding season, they're typically also serve as a food cache. So here we have a video, male runs in, grabs out a prey item that he's kept in the burrow, feeds on it himself here a little bit. But typically during the breeding season, we see a nest burrow and then nearby a second burrow that the male uses as a food cache and kind of his bachelor pad or a man cave or whatever it is, where he kind of stays and keeps food, stores food, and delivers food to the nest chamber. Female comes out, grabs that food, and then takes it into the young. These burrows that they inhabit come in many shapes and sizes. The owls themselves are fairly adaptable, but they're typically occupying already dug burrows. Natural burrows include, in our area, are dug by badgers, coyotes, sometimes ground squirrels or marmots. In the rest of the range, or at least in the rest of the range in the US, there's prairie dogs, are a major burrower that owls are associated with, as well as tortoises in Florida, where gopher tortoises provide burrows for owls. But they'll also utilize a lot of different habitats, anthropogenic burrows, such as pipes and irrigation structures, culverts, boulder piles at farm, farm boulders that they pile up, and some concrete slabs. as well as artificial burrows that are purposefully installed for burrowing owls. And this is kind of just as you walk up to an artificial burrow, what you see, it's pretty much just a hole in the ground and not much to it. That post behind it kind of serves as a perching platform for the owl. The male will sit up there and be able to survey the area. I also kind of use those typically to mark where the chamber is underground, so I can do repairs and maintenance. But there's not much to look at from the outside of the burrow, but there's a lot more going on underground there. And this is a colleague, David Johnson, and I think Mike Gregg with US Fish, and they're installing some, this is a burrowing owl artificial burrow, similar to the type that we've used in Pasco the last decade or so. So there's about a 10-foot, 8 to 10-foot corrugated tubing that runs into a half of a 55-barrel juice drum. And there's a chimney basically built on top. That's an access portal for us to use for maintenance, to clean out the burrow as needed, or during research projects to monitor the nest or band young or something like that. There's been some modifications to this design, but for the most part, that's the basic rundown of it. So because we have that access portal on top, we have an opportunity to collect a lot of breeding data on phenology, and I'll present some of that here. In the Columbia Basin, we typically see egg laying begin in late March, primarily April, mid-April on average. What's really fascinating to me with this species is when you think of a raptor or an owl, most of those that we think of typically only get off 2, maybe 3 young per year. Clutch size of most raptors is fairly small. Burrowing owls is averaging 8.5 eggs per nest. And I needed to update this and forgot to, but this year I had 13 eggs in one of the nest chambers. So they have a high productivity potential. And the female, as I mentioned, will incubate this nest for about a month. Now, not all of the eggs that hatch make it to be fledglings. There is a fair amount of sibling side during poor years of productivity with low prey availability, but it's really not that uncommon for me to go and band 8 to 10 nestlings at a burrow, which is a lot of owls. And because of this, this is one of the reasons the artificial burrow project has been fairly successful. Most of the sites I'm using are on private land. These are farmers who have some spare area that they're not using, or maybe it's not farmable. They don't mind a family of 13 plus 14 owls coming out and hunting in their field every night, taking out crickets, grasshoppers, rodents, and other pests that they consider anti their interests in agriculture. So these guys can really clear up a farm field of rodents. Let's see, I think I covered the incubation, and then the mean hatch date. We usually start to see young in May through June. This is a photo of some fairly young chicks, just probably a day or 2 old. And the female, and again, this is in artificial burrow, and we're just kind of throwing a camera in the chimney, which is a 5-gallon barrel on top of the chamber. Here's a slightly older chick, maybe 3 days old. And then this is an awkward teenage phased juvenile. This is probably a little over around 2 weeks, maybe a little more. At 14 days old, they can't fly, but they do start walking around, and they'll come out to the entrance of the burrow, come explore, see the sights. But they pretty much stay right at what we call the apron, just kind of the front area, a few feet in front of the entrance to the tube or the burrow. For the research projects, Global Owl and DFW, Global Owl has a site in the Umatilla Chemical Depot in Oregon. That's no longer a chemical depot anymore, and it's now being turned over to some of the tribes and counties. But that project's going to be continuing with the Umatilla tribe, and also our efforts as well as U.S. Fish. We've done some banding and try to band the young at 20 to 30 days old, when we kind of right before they're able to fly. And the young can reach independence and probably forage for themselves at around 40 days, but typically we see them staying about 2 months with the family unit and being provisioned by mom and dad, up to 100 days old. These are birds at banding age, so probably the one on the right is probably like 30 days, maybe some younger ones in the bag there on the left bunched up. This is about my favorite age, when I think they're probably the cutest, which is high stakes for an animal that's pretty cute overall at all ages. You can test your age and sexing this family group. The juvenile is pretty obvious, very buffy fronted, very brown, headed, no spotting. They're in the middle. And then you've got dad tearing something up with some entrails next to him, looking very pale, and the female looking a little darker overall, standing off to the side. Now this is always a part that amazes me, is that, these owls are basically relying on predators, at least nest predators, for their homes, badgers, coyotes. These are the things that are making their burrow, and these are also the things most likely to eat an adult or predate a nest. And a lot of other things, like the use burrows. We've had ground squirrels. That's a California ground squirrel in one of the artificial burrows. You get snakes coming in there. We have problems actually with skunks hibernating in some of the burrows. And there's ever-present black widows that we always are finding, usually one in front of every entrance. And the owls are all kind of just feisty enough that they fend off these critters or coexist with them. But the most amazing adaptation to me, and I hope this works, is let's see, there's a chance that this won't work, but you're going to hear a sound in a second, and I don't know if that's playing through. Can folks hear anything? No. I don't know how to change this. That's a problem because it's using my microphone and not playing the sound from my computer. But basically, you're hearing a hissing, rattling sound that sounds identical to a den of rattlesnakes. And if you were a mammal, a skunk or a badger or a coyote, sticking your face first into a hole in the ground and heard a bunch of rattlesnakes, you probably would back up. I regularly reach my hand back really quickly when I hear that noise when I'm working around the burrows. But it's actually evolutionary adaptation of the juvenile burrowing owls to hiss in unison and create a rattling noise. I'll see at the end if I can get a way to maybe this will work. Nope, that doesn't do that. I don't know how to do it in Zoom to change it so it uses my computer audio and broadcasts that. But and the owls only make it as juveniles. You won't hear adults make this hissing rattle, but the young do. And the fact that these owls make that noise, but obviously have most likely not learned it from hearing rattlesnakes or anything like that, It's just been a evolutionary advantage that allowed more and more nests and clutches to survive by making that noise when they felt vibrations or sounds of something coming in their burrow. Um, for prey, I mean, they really eat anything they can get their talons on. Mostly small mammals. They'll also take away insects, lizards, amphibians, and birds. This is a burrow I had to clean out because there was some construction happening, and this was all of the prey in the cache of one of the males. This was actually before the breeding season, but just as he's probably trying to attract a mate. So I relocated all this to a different one, but next door. But there's something like 4 species of rodent in here. There's pocket gophers, kangaroo rats, various 2 or 3 different species of field mice. This is hard to see on your screen, but is a tiger salamander. This is an American robin wing. There's was it a Jerusalem cricket and some other invertebrates that were in there. And so these guys are just, he was stocking up, trying to impress his mate, show him that he's a good hunter, provider. And this is the reason why these burrowing owls can produce 13 eggs if they're well fed. What's this? So this is an adult flying in with a prey item. As I kind of mentioned, the male will come, bring prey out. This is actually a fairly old juvenile, probably about to get banded, who rushes out, grabs some food from the adult. The conventional range map of burrowing owls is interesting to me. This is what you always kind of see in the books. We've got owls in Washington in the summer, then they winter down in Southern California, Mexico. Not usually wintering above this line, except for the Florida subspecies. When you look at the Christmas bird count that we were just talking about kind of before this, there's a lot of blue. This is count data from the Christmas bird count, indicating the range of burrowing owl where they've been detected on the Christmas bird count. So there's a whole bunch of stuff up the West Coast in the Columbia Basin where we get a special blob there and elsewhere. And so what's going on there? It turns out, and this is pretty much the only place for the Western subspecies, but the Pacific Northwest Columbia Basin has a partially migratory population. I think it's more than 15%, but a good portion, probably males, spend the winter here. Most of the females and juveniles seem to migrate. They depart August, September after the breeding season, and then return in February as late as April from breeding or from wintering sites in California. But the reason for this is that the Columbia Basin has some of the more mild climate compared to some of the range in the Great Plains that are really a lot colder, get a lot more snowfall. And the species here, the most important thing for the burrowing owl is its burrow. And the best way to attract a mate and have a successful brood is to have a good burrow in a good location. If you found a good burrow, the best way to keep it is to make sure that you're there early and back first to defend that burrow during the breeding season. And the best way to be there first is to never leave. And so we've got quite a few owls that, as long as the winter is mild, will overwinter here. But it's certainly a risk. They risk, a late snow and freeze that lasts for several years or several months, like we had like 17, 18. And then they've got to move. And if they make it, well, we're not too sure. But, it is a risk trying to stay and be that first bird back at the good burrow site. Just a great photo by a young photographer. I think this is along the coast of Northern California, burrowing owl in the snow. Happens to be one of the burrowing owls from the Columbia Basin. They were able to get a few more photos and confirm the band was one that I'd put on at the Arid Lands Ecology Reserve. I think this was 2 years ago. But so we do get data about movements from the banding as well as longevity. But we've done some more work with geolocators and satellite transmitters, and the we is partly me, but a lot of partners as well doing this work. University of Idaho and the Global Owl Project and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They put some geolocators out. These are fairly coarse instruments that use the amount of daylight to help determine where the geolocator is on the Earth's surface. They did this across the western states to sample the subspecies, and you can see that like light blue color are birds from the Pacific Northwest. Most of them wintered down along California, but several actually appeared to move north further into the Columbia Basin. But this data is fairly coarse, being geolocator data. The accuracy is a few 100 kilometers. You didn't see that kind of northward movement. I think I zoom in here a little bit on Washington. So you can see they were all banded in the kind of Tri-Cities area. Several moved north into those hatched areas. Those are males. And then the plain circles are the wintering grounds of the females. And you can see some males also went down into California. So most of our migratory owls moved to California, but a portion seem to stay in the Columbia Basin and may move around. We also upgraded to some satellite telemetry units. These have more like GPS quality location data. So we have real fine-tuned data. I only put a few of these out, 1 or 2 in each state. And the owl banded in Pasco went down to Southern California and wintered on the Channel Islands. Now, the Channel Islands were kind of a special place for me as an early biologist. One of my first jobs was on San Clemente Island working with loggerhead shrikes. My lifer burrowing owl was seen in the winter on San Clemente Island, where we'd get a small number influx just during the winter. And the Salton Sea is kind of a hot spot for burrowing owls. And all the biologists just assume they must be coming over from the mainland near Salton Sea, Imperial Valley. It took me 10 years later to learn that our owls from Washington are moving down to the Channel Islands and coastal California and Imperial and the Central Valley. This owl tagged in Pasco went down and wintered on the Channel Island, returned to Pasco, bred, and went down a second year. And we were able to follow her for 2 migrations. And then I cut the transmitter off when it started to malfunction. And she was unburdened after providing us that exciting, insightful data. So we're doing some of this again now. In 2023, we put out some tags on adult males. The migratory study was with females in the past. Now we're looking at male movements, trying to understand areas that are important to them in the Columbia Basin post-breeding and through the winter. Are they staying at their burrow sites? Are they moving to other locations, as we've seen with some of that geolocator data that we're not certain on the accuracy of that. To help identify any important wintering locations, we're trying out some new technology with different transmitter styles, and hopefully we'll have some more data on that about it next year. We have tags out. Some of them have stopped working, some of them are still working, but the data really hasn't been analyzed yet. Into some of the less fortunate news, it's a species that has been undergoing a decline, annual decline of about 1.5%, which over 40 years is about half of the population lost in the past 40 years. And this is, I believe this is kind of range-wide for the Western subspecies. The breeding range has been reduced by about a half as well. And in Washington, it's probably more than that. We were talking before the meeting. It's been a long time since there's been burrowing owls in Spokane County. We're not seeing them in the Okanagan anymore. We're not seeing them in Walla Walla or Whitman County very regularly. And the range is just sort of contracting down into the lowest areas of the Columbia Basin, Tri-Cities, Ephrata, Othello, Umatilla, Oregon. Overall, the primary cause to a lot of this, like most species declines, is habitat. I've seen this number, 80% loss of native shrub steppe in the Columbia Basin. I think that's really misleading. While there's been 80% conversion of probably shrub steppe land cover, it's really a disproportional loss. When we think of shrub steppe today, I think most of us think of, the channeled scablands and some of these places where this is the worst of what's left of what the native shrub steppe habitat would have been. There's places that you can still find a few where, there's forests of sage 15 feet tall, but these, sagebrush isn't only meant to eke out a meager existence on this rocky, barren, infertile soil. They thrive with a little bit of water and deep soil habitat, but we've disproportionately lost all that habitat. So what is left is basically what's left. I mean, it's the last stand of some of our shrub steppe, and it's just a shadow of what the Columbia Basin shrub steppe would have been. And what's remained is also degraded at various extents, or lost now almost completely by fire. But invasive annuals really, when you see that shrub steppe, the component that's really important is that soil crust. There's a cryptobiotic crust that kind of provides this barren foraging ground in between the shrub cover. A lot of species depend on that, like sagebrush sparrow, for foraging, as well as burrowing owls. And when you get this thick carpet of cheatgrass and other annual grasses, those species really have a difficult time. Even if the shrub cover remains, it's degraded and somewhat unusable by certain other species. So to think that we have 20% of our shrub steppe left is I think optimistic. Where, a lot of that conversion has been to agriculture, deep soil sites. With the artificial burrow project, owls don't need a lot of pristine habitat though, which is one of their resilient factors. We're able to install artificial burrows for a family of owls in my favorite oxymoron, which is the circle corner. This is where you have your irrigated crop circle, and where all those circles come together, you have this corner. Usually it's kind of sits idly. Sometimes they stack some hay there. But we've installed with private landowners several artificial burrows in these small acreage sites that otherwise go unused, and the owls have done fantastic there. Of course, we're increasing efficiency. Circles are getting more squares, create smaller corners. We're increasing efficiency, and by we, I mean society, agriculture in general. Placing smaller pivots in small circle corners. So even these, this is good in that it, in some ways, prevents greater expansion of agriculture using land effectively where it's already heavily degraded or disturbed. But at the same time, we lose these small little islands of nearly pathetic habitat that might have remained. But other threats besides habitat loss exist. There's decline of burrowing mammals. Almost most of the species that burrow are a species of concern in Washington. Our ground squirrels, our badgers. Fortunately, coyotes seem to be doing good, but they just don't dig as prolifically as some of these other species. And that's again due to deep soil loss, persecution, and to some extent diseases like plague and the habitat loss. So it's currently a species of concern in Washington, though I will touch on this a little bit more at the end. Federally, they're basically listed or protected in a variety of methods in several states and countries. But so what do we need to do about it? In Washington, these are some of the conservation needs. We still need to identify where we have burrowing owls remaining. There is some benefit to additional monitoring. And we need to protect existing habitat, what we have left, reduce fires, do development as intelligently as possible, restore degraded habitat. There's plenty of opportunity for that. That can include artificial burrow work, which is kind of a habitat enhancement specific for burrowing owls. It is sort of a Band-Aid approach, but it may be the only option that we have in some levels. We have to coordinate across multiple states and partners. And again, help work to manage and recover burrowing animals. Which sounds like a lot. It's easy to kind of say that stuff, but we actually have some good news and things that are being done. Identifying some of these owl sites and winter ecology. We hope to do that with this transmitter study. And with our partners in British Columbia, they're doing a juvenile study as well. So we do have some tagged owl juveniles in Washington as part of that study, looking at movements and survival. And Washington Fish and Wildlife is planning a broader statewide survey for occupancy of burrowing owls. Audubon was a major player in the least conflict solar siting process, which is launched this year to help better guide development of solar, which is really ramping up in the state, if you haven't heard. WDFW had a landfall of funding. We have been very successful at working with the legislature to secure funding for long-term shrub step restoration and resiliency through what we're calling WISRI. Some of this funding is directly impacting me and my project. We'll be bringing on a new biologist based out of the Tri-Cities early this year. So I'm looking forward to that, to be able to focus a little more directly on shrubs or on shrub step and burrowing owls. That funding's also going into habitat restoration. And one of the projects that I've kind of pitched and is getting some traction is expanding the artificial burrow work, looking at stepping stones that kind of help to reconnect burrowing owl populations. There's been a lot of success in the Umatilla Depot. We have a lot of translocation data of birds moving back and forth between Pasco and Umatilla. That's a distance of something, I think it's 60 kilometers, or maybe it's 60 miles. But in any case, using that distance, we know we have a regular turnover of individuals at that distance. Mimicking that, moving artificial burrows further north, and then reconnecting it with the British Columbia efforts, where they've been doing captive breeding and releasing an artificial burrow work of the federally endangered burrowing owl in Canada. But their owls migrate, they come south, and there's such a disjunct location for many other breeding burrowing owls that they're just not getting returned. So trying to build more continuity in the burrowing owl landscape in the Pacific Northwest would be the goal of that effort. We have a burrowing owl working group that's been kicked off with several local partners, and again, doing work to manage burrowing animals. There's opportunities with the WISRI funding, and we've been at WFW increasing our interest in ground squirrels, both for Frisianus hawk benefits and burrowing owls, so and for the squirrels themselves. So we have been kicking off several surveys over the past few years to get more information on their distribution and status. And I did mention earlier that it's currently listed as a species of concern. I don't know if Spokane Audubon was part of this, but several Audubon groups signed on to a petition to DFW to list the burrowing owl as endangered in the state of Washington. That petition was not denied, and the steps are being taken to move forward with a status review. The results of that are to be determined, but will go to the commission at some point within the next year and likely result in a change of status of burrowing owl. This burrowing owl is obviously already protected. The species of concern, we're doing work for it, but it doesn't hurt to have an elevated profile, especially with other partners, developers, and other agencies that take state listing as insight into making their management decisions. So that's some good work completed by possibly some of you and other colleagues. So this is just kind of a conceptual map I was going to show about kind of the stepping stone idea. Red is where we have active artificial burrow projects. You can see maybe it's kind of small, but there's red dots up in BC, right over the border. There's red dots in the Tri-Cities area and Hanford, a big blob down at Oregon, and then opportunities to work with partners, tribes, and others on establishing clusters to help promote burrowing owls where some breeding individuals may remain, and hopefully other spots that we can expand their range in Washington. Maybe after doing this north-south connection, we can reach out towards Spokane, or maybe some will naturally disperse there. But with that, I appreciate the time, and I'll answer any questions if we have time.
Jason, what is their foraging range?
So yeah, foraging range, from some of the preliminary data that we've got from these tagged males, I mean, they're mostly staying within about a mile or so of the burrow. And so, this will obviously depend upon the burrow site and where foraging opportunities are. In the agriculture and even in the kind of semi-natural habitat at the Hanford, we do see them foraging a lot along kind of dirt roads, so they need that kind of open foraging area. But yeah, so I would say maybe 2 miles at the farthest is what we've seen on some of this initial stuff, but they stay pretty local during the breeding season. Outside of that, I don't know yet.
Another question is, so part of what I was asking is, how densely populated can an area be? I mean, how close together can some of the burrows be?
Yeah, so we generally try to place them about, 200, 300 meters apart from a cluster, but they're fairly tolerant in places where they have, say, prairie dogs as a primary burrower, because those species, the burrow makers are fairly colonial. Burrowing owls in some of the literature suggests that they are somewhat colonial, and there may be a conspecific attraction key to that. But for the most part, they do defend a fairly small territory. They don't want other owls coming to their burrows, but they can be fairly tolerant of owls nearby. So yeah, 200, 300 meters has worked for our artificial setups, and we don't see a lot of young or anything being predated by rival males or anything like that. But then for that, then you get a lot of mouths in a small area. You better have pretty good prey density for them to pull off 10 chicks each.
do you see much overlap with kestrels and burrowing owls? Are they kind of compatible?
Well, I haven't noticed any interactions. Kestrels are cavity nesters that, they're probably not going to nest often too close to where these burrowing owls are, but they probably primarily be prey competitors. We don't, burrowing owls likely too large to be a prey item for kestrels. We do see northern harriers that occupy the same kind of landscape. Often will depredate nests or nestlings opportunistically if they're outside the burrow. But yeah, with kestrels, haven't noticed any interactions.
Jason, if you'd like to share sound, you can go to share screen and there should be a little box, I think it's in the bottom left corner, that says,
Share sound.
and if you don't want to do it tonight, you can do it another time, but it would allow you to share.
All right, let's see if this. This is the only way I know how to do this right here. Let's see if this works.
Ooh, yeah.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
So that is the terrifying sound I face whenever I'm reaching my hand into the chimney to get into the nest chamber. And I still instinctively jerk my hand back when they go off. But yeah, here you can see, maybe not. How do I do that again? So that's the live video clip of them making that noise.
Wow.
And that's them in a bird bag that could just put several siblings in at the same time to band. Well, thanks for that IT tip. Sorry about that.
Did I miss it? Or did you already share? What's the success rate, fledging success rate when you have a brood of, 11 to 16 chicks?
Yeah, so we don't, when we go to band, we typically, we try to not do as much disturbance. So ideally, I'm just going to band the young, and then we haven't been returning regularly to see, if the banded young make it to independence or fledge. It's kind of hard to do that with the species. So unfortunately, I really only know how many of them are making it to banding age, which is about 20 to 30 days. And it's not uncommon to band. It really depends on the year. Some years, it seems like 100% get to be, we'll have 7 to 8 to 10 nestlings at every nest site. And then, a year where maybe we have a whole lot of drought or, kind of a lot of early weather that causes a lot of the grass to grow really dense. You might see, some nests only have 2 young, 1 or 2 sometimes. So I don't have a ton of data comparing, because we don't follow them very closely throughout the year. We haven't, at least not up to this point. I don't know. I can't make a good connection between how many eggs there were, how many hatched, how many young. But I think the key is that as long as there's prey availability, which in our site seems to typically be adequate for them to fledge young of a fairly high percentage of the eggs that we see. Usually 70% of the eggs seem to be hatching and make it to banding age. The question is really what happens after they disperse from the site. So some of this telemetry data this year hopefully will tell us some of that. But good question. I wish we part of me wants to go tinker with these guys a whole lot more, and then sometimes I, just want to leave them be. So, yeah, I wish we
Thank
knew
you.
some more.
Thank you.
Do you have any sense, because it's, again, it would be hard data to obtain, but any sense of how, what the success rate between the artificial burrows versus natural burrows?
Yeah, so I haven't done a lot of work with natural burrows that are not associated closely with the artificial burrow network. Occasionally we'll have a badger coyote dig, a hole within a couple 100 meters of the artificial burrow array, and we'll observe owls nest in there. One of the challenges, I know others have done this, I believe, there's artificial burrows in California and a bunch of other places. We just don't have a lot of owls nesting in natural burrows in Washington that we come across. In the how many years have I been here now? 8 to 9 years. In Benton and Franklin County, and I do surveys for hawks and squirrels and a lot of other things. I'm in the field. I've only come across wild, not associated with artificial burrows, burrowing owls, maybe 2 or 3 times, in the wild, where they're in a natural burrow in a place we didn't anticipate. Almost all of them seem to be, that we know about, are restricted to artificial burrows. And so they seem to be doing well to persist. There's a great, there is some news articles that were published about the Army Chemical Depot in Umatilla. That was really an example of where the artificial burrows could help, not just kind of help a whole population hold on, but actually really thrive. I think there were 3, I can't remember if it's 3 adult owls or 3 pairs left on the whole depot 12 years ago when they started doing the artificial burrow project. And on the 12th year of the study, which was I think 21, I want to say they banded over 300 chicks and regularly have over 50 pairs of owls on the depot now. So, and that's all been pretty much because of the artificial burrow work. But the artificial burrows take maintenance. They aren't something you can just throw on the ground and walk away from. So they do, they're not, if they were that easy, they'd be easy to throw everywhere and then walk away from. But they do take pretty much annual maintenance and some time. So we'd like to see some more of them, I think.
So Jason, there's a question on the chat earlier. How many artificial burrows do you have installed, and are they using them year after year?
Good question. So my project has about 100 burrows, but these burrows are arranged in clusters of 2 or 3. As I mentioned, there's typically a nest burrow, the male's burrow, and then usually I have a 3rd one that just helps the young kind of disperse or seek cover, or if one gets clogged, I can't get to it, they still have 2 for breeding. So that's about, well, probably something like 33 sites that I manage around Pasco. But there's also the Hanford, Central Hanford has several artificial burrows, and the U.S. Fish on Ale has some artificial burrows. I believe they have another there's probably about 15 more pair of owls on Ale, and I have probably about 15 to 20 pair using I probably actually have removed some, so I'm probably down to 25 clusters of burrows, and I probably have 15 to 20 pairs using them. Where they're in good habitat and good sites, they're almost 100% occupancy. The only reason that I have some that aren't used is that they've never been used for whatever reason. They kind of were put in sites that owls just don't like. But if you get them in a good area where there's owls already present, they've really been able to help bolster the population. The hard thing is getting owls to find them if you're installing them in a place that doesn't have a current burrowing owl population. So I think that's another key to doing some of this work sooner. While we do still see some owls breeding in Grant County and in some of these other areas where we can help bolster those populations.
So does that mean that your idea to connect the owls from where you're at up to Canada would be more artificial burrows?
Yeah. So that's sort of putting the burrows in clusters that could support sort of a small meta population of maybe like 20 breeding pair. And then replicating that further north. There's some partners interested in being involved in that. Some land management agencies, and some of that might be private land, some of it could be partner properties, but yeah, so that would be through artificial burrows, just kind of as anchor points, stepping stones or anchor points that ideally, help bolster an existing population. But, in the Okanagan, where we may not have any more burrowing owls, there'd have to be some sort of pioneering finders that get up there or could experiment with translocation. But it's nice to not get too hands-on if we can help it. Let's see. So okay, I got the chat open now. So yeah, when we do the clusters, when we put in artificial burrows, we put them in pairs of 2 or 3, so that the owls have, one pair owl is using 2 or 3 burrows. And then a question about if the endangered status will provide more money for the project, and do we need money from Audubon chapters? Right now, so we did have 2 Audubon chapters provide transmitters, satellite tags. Most of the thing came from DFW and some other partners I'm blanking on at the moment. But right now, I think so 2 questions there. The endangered status, really, DFW's already kind of committed. I've been receiving messages from folks in Olympia about wanting to ramp up burrowing owl work, information, surveys, conservation. Endangered status will help relay that message and allow us to kind of double down on that with partners. Partners like federal partners or other state agencies or development folks that kind of, partners at Hanford that, if a species on a list, they really prioritize work with that. Places like maybe the Yakima Training Center or, other federal land managers. I think that's where kind of that endangered status kind of sends a message that creates opportunities. Not necessarily but doesn't necessarily create money within DFW to focus on owls, but it does help us prioritize as well. So it's really just shining a spotlight on them, and I think that's good. And I'll reach, it's typically, right now, I don't know how, again, unless we have a particular thing we're trying to buy, it's sort of awkward with DFW, or as far as I understand it, just get money. We have a high overhead, so it's often better to not give us money, but to give it to another partner to do some of the work. But sometimes we have opportunities and we can be proactive about reaching out to Audubon for sure, like some of those transmitter projects and things like that. In that case, we just had Audubon buy them directly and we put them out. So they weren't actually giving us any money.
So Jason, what does one installation cost? Not a cluster, but just one.
Oh, I mean, gosh, I
Ballpark.
mean, I will. If you had to go and, retail buy, a juice barrel is probably like 50 or 80 bucks, I think. And so then you got two of them. Once you cut it in half, a 5-gallon bucket's $5. And that irrigation tubing, I mean, they're cheap. They're cheap as heck. The challenge is cultural resource reviews for state agencies to kind of do stuff, to do any digging in the ground. That's kind of where the money goes, and then the staff time to do stuff, or maybe equipment rental. I put tons of these in just by hand and a shovel with 2 or 3 volunteers. So that's easy. But if you want to put in 100 of them, you're going to want to rent an excavator and stuff like that. But the supplies are super cheap. Some a can of liquid nails, probably for $100 you could make a couple. And we've had, we still have supplies to put more in, so we're not limited by that. It's really just finding landowners in suitable habitat, doing the cultural clearance, and having the time to actually focus on this, which we're getting towards now. So these are associated development. So there's a question about I'm not sure if I understand, any feasible way to associate human development with vegetative plantings, dedicated owl habitat. So if this is just how to, basically landscape for owls, I'm not sure if that is sort of the question, but I mean, basically eradication of cheatgrass and non-native invasives, and then providing basically short grass habitat, some shrub components helpful for perching, but that's the primary habitat that they need. If I didn't answer that question properly, go ahead and correct me in the chat and I'll try again. But otherwise, I don't see any other questions, so that might be all I have.
Thanks, Jason. It was great presentation. Nice to hear about the work that you're doing.